The early spring rain cast a reflective mood in the small, cozy apartment where Deborah and Alexander had started their lives together. It was the kind of place that felt like a haven from the outside world, filled with mementos of their love and dreams for the future. Deborah, a woman of grace and resilience, stood by the window, her gaze lost in the rhythmic dance of the raindrops. She turned as Alexander entered the room, his presence commanding yet strangely distant lately. "Alex," Deborah began, her voice laced with a mix of hope and apprehension. "I've been thinking about our future, about starting a family together. I can't imagine anything more beautiful than sharing a piece of our love, a child." Alexander paused, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. He had always been the dreamer, the one who promised the stars, but his hesitation was palpable. "Deborah," he finally spoke, his voice betraying a hint of unease. "I love you, and I love the life we have. But a child? That's a big step, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of responsibility." Deborah felt a cold wave of disappointment, but she pressed on, her heart clinging to the hope that had always been the foundation of their relationship. "But you said we were in this together, that you wanted a family too. Was that just a dream?" Alexander moved closer, taking her hands in his, a gesture that once would have comforted her. "I do want us to be together, and I meant every promise I made, but wanting a family and being ready are two different things. I need time, Deborah. We have plenty of it." Deborah looked into Alexander's eyes, searching for the man who had made those promises with such conviction. She could see his love, but it was overshadowed by a fear she hadn't noticed before. "Time is the one thing we can't control, Alex. I thought we were on the same path." "I believed in us, in our future together," Deborah said, her voice a soft whisper, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. Alexander's embrace was tight, as if trying to hold together the fragments of a dream that was slowly slipping away. "I believe in us too, Deborah. Let's just take it one step at a time. We can revisit the idea of a family later, can't we?" As Alexander held her, Deborah wanted to believe in his words, to hold on to the promise of a future together. But in her heart she knew that their paths were beginning to diverge, with her dreams of a family feeling more like a solo journey than one they would embark on together. The rain continued to fall, a silent witness to the promises made and the uncertainty that now lay between them. In that moment, Deborah realized that love alone might not be enough to bridge the gap between their desires for the future. Weeks had turned into months since the conversation by the window, and the gap between Deborah and Alexander had widened, filled with unspoken fears and unmet expectations. Deborah, carrying the weight of their unrealized dreams, discovered she was pregnant. It was a revelation that brought both joy and trepidation. Sitting across from each other at their small dining table, cluttered with the remnants of a quiet dinner, Deborah mustered the courage to steer their lives into the unknown. "Alex, I have something important to tell you," she began, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her heart. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, a defining moment that demanded a response. Alexander's reaction was a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Pregnant? Are you sure?" His voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking louder might make it more real. "Yes, I'm sure. I went to the doctor." Deborah's hands trembled, but her resolve was firm. "This is our child, a part of us. Isn't this what we've always talked about?" Alexander's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. He rose from his chair, pacing the room as he processed the news. This is unexpected. I'm not ready to be a father, Deborah. I can't do this." Deborah watched him, her heart sinking. "But Alex, this child is a gift, our love made manifest. We can figure this out together. We're a team, remember?" Alexander stopped pacing, facing her with a look of desperation. "A team? Deborah, I can barely manage my own life. How can I be responsible for another? I told you I needed time, and this accelerates everything. I'm not prepared for it." The distance between them had never felt so vast. Deborah's dream of a happy family was crumbling before her eyes, and with it, her belief in the man she loved. "Alex, please," she pleaded, "we can make this work. I need you to be here with me, with our child." Alexander shook his head, the finality in his gesture breaking her heart. "I'm sorry, Deborah. I can't. I just can't." In the days that followed, their home became a battleground of silence and avoidance. Deborah grappled with the reality of her situation, the joy of her pregnancy overshadowed by Alexander's rejection. Faced with the prospect of raising a child alone in an environment devoid of support and love, Deborah made the excruciating decision to give her baby up for adoption. It was a decision born from a place of love, a hope for a better future for her child, and a sacrifice that would leave an indelible mark on her soul. The day she signed the adoption papers, Deborah sat alone, the absence of Alexander's signature a testament to his final abandonment. She whispered a silent promise to her unborn child, a promise of love and a better life, as tears streamed down her face, the ink on the paper blurring under the weight of her sorrow. "I'm doing this for you, my little one," she murmured, a mother's love enduring even in the face of her greatest loss. "I hope one day you'll understand." As she walked out of the agency, the sky opened up, a gentle rain falling, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the sacrifice of a mother's love. Deborah's decision, made in solitude and despair, set her on a path she never imagined, a journey of healing, discovery, and the hope of redemption. Years had woven complexity and change into Deborah's life tapestry, bringing her to a place of both material comfort and emotional void. The bustling city, with its unending rhythm, was a stark contrast to the quiet desperation that once filled her small apartment. Now, as the wife of Patrick, an influential business magnate, Deborah found herself enveloped in a world of luxury and opulence, a far cry from her modest beginnings. On a crisp autumn evening, as they sat in their expansive living room overlooking the city, the air was filled with the soft melody of a piano concerto, Patrick's choice to unwind after a long day. Deborah, however, was elsewhere in her thoughts, her gaze fixed on the empty space beside her, a silent reminder of the child she once carried. "Deborah, you've been quiet tonight. Is everything all right?" Patrick's voice, deep and concerned, broke the silence. She turned to him, forcing a smile. "I was just thinking about us, our life together. It's more than I could have ever asked for." Patrick moved closer, taking her hand in his. "I'm glad to hear that. But I sense there's something more. You can tell me anything, you know that." Deborah sighed, the weight of her unspoken thoughts pressing down on her. "It's just that ... Sometimes I wonder about the family we could have had. I know we've tried, and the doctors." Patrick squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Deborah, our journey together is far from over. We have options: IVF, surrogacy, adoption. We'll find a way. I want to build a family with you, no matter what it takes." The sincerity in Patrick's eyes sparked a flicker of hope within Deborah, a balm to the ache of her past decisions. "I want that too, Patrick. More than anything." He smiled, his optimism unwavering. "Then we'll make it happen. Together, we'll explore every possibility until we find the one that brings us our child." Their conversation drifted into plans and dreams, a future filled with the laughter of children. For Deborah, this was a second chance, an opportunity to mend the pieces of her heart left behind in another life. Yet, deep down, she knew no amount of wealth or love could fill the void left by her firstborn. The decision to give Tyler up for adoption was a scar that time had softened but not erased. As they retired to their room that night, Patrick's words echoed in her mind, a promise of a new beginning. Deborah allowed herself to believe in the possibility of happiness and redemption, even as the shadow of her past lingered, a silent companion in her journey forward. Lying in bed, watching the city lights twinkle like distant stars, Deborah whispered into the night, "Tyler, wherever you are, I hope you're happy. You're always in my heart." It was a confession of love and regret, a mother's eternal bond with her child, unseen but unbreakable. And in that moment, Deborah realized that her new beginning with Patrick was not just about creating a future, but also about reconciling with her past. It was a journey she was now ready to embark on, with hope as her guiding light. As autumn waned into winter, the world outside Deborah and Patrick's luxurious home transformed under a blanket of snow, turning the city into a picturesque scene from a holiday card. Inside, however, Deborah wrestled with the lingering shadows of her past and the unfulfilled yearning for a child. Despite Patrick's unwavering support, the void remained, a silent echo of her heart's deepest desires. One chilly morning, with the city still wrapped in the early light, Deborah decided to take a walk in the nearby park, seeking solace in the serene beauty of nature. The crisp air and the soft crunch of snow underfoot offered a temporary escape from her inner turmoil. As she walked, lost in thought, a sudden flurry of activity at the park's entrance caught her attention. A maintenance crew was hard at work, clearing the pathways of snow. Among them was a man, young and vigorous, maneuvering a snowblower with practiced ease. Something about him seemed oddly familiar, stirring a sense of déjà vu within Deborah. Driven by curiosity, Deborah approached the man, her gaze drawn to a distinct feature that made her heart skip a beat: a small birthmark on his wrist, visible as he adjusted his glove. It was eerily similar to the one she remembered so vividly on her son Tyler. "Excuse me," Deborah called out, her voice slightly trembling. The man turned off the snowblower, his face breaking into a friendly smile. "Yes, ma, I am. Can I help you?" Deborah hesitated, her mind racing. I couldn't help but notice your birthmark. It's quite unique." The man glanced at his wrist, then back at Deborah, his smile fading into a look of curiosity. "Oh, this? Yeah, I've had it since I was born. Funny, my dad had one just like it." The mention of his father sent a jolt through Deborah. Could this be a mere coincidence, or was fate weaving its intricate web around her once again? "I'm sorry to bother you," Deborah stammered, unsure of how to proceed. "It's just that. Someone very close to me had a similar mark. It's a strange coincidence." The man's expression softened, sensing the emotional undercurrent in her words. "No worries, ma'am. Life is full of strange coincidences. I'm Frank, by the way." "Deborah," she replied, offering a small, uncertain smile. A brief silence fell between them, filled with unspoken questions and the weight of Deborah's realization. Frank, sensing her discomfort, decided to break the ice. "Would you like a cup of coffee? There's a little cafe just around the corner. It's freezing out here, and it sounds like you could use a warm-up." Deborah nodded, grateful for the kindness in his offer. "I'd like that, Frank. Thank you." As they walked to the cafe, Deborah wrestled with the torrent of emotions Frank's presence had unleashed. The birthmark, his warm demeanor, the echo of a past she had tried so hard to leave behind, all of it pointed to a connection she couldn't ignore. Sitting across from Frank in the cozy warmth of the cafe, Deborah found herself opening up about her love for the park, the city, and the silent dreams she harbored. Frank listened, his attention genuine, sharing snippets of his own life in return. As they parted ways, Deborah felt a strange sense of comfort, a connection forged from an unexpected encounter that offered a glimmer of hope in her quest for closure and fulfillment. Little did she know, this meeting with Frank would set the stage for revelations that would change the course of her life, leading her on a path toward healing and the possibility of reclaiming a piece of her heart she thought was lost forever. In the weeks following her encounter with Frank, Deborah found herself drawn back to the park, each visit an attempt to unravel the feelings and questions that their meeting had stirred. The coincidence of the birthmark and Frank's gentle demeanor had ignited a spark of hope in her heart, a possibility that fate might be offering her a path to redemption. One crisp morning, As the park glistened under a fresh snowfall, Deborah spotted Frank clearing a path through the snow. She approached him, this time with a determined stride, no longer willing to let chance slip through her fingers. "Good morning," Frank Deborah greeted, her voice steadier than before. Frank looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Deborah, good to see you again. How have you been?" "I've been well, thank you." "Frank, can we talk?" Somewhere more private, Deborah asked, her tone serious. "Sure, let's head to the cafe. It's too cold to have a serious conversation out here," Frank suggested, turning off the snowblower. Seated in the quiet corner of the cafe, with steaming cups of coffee in front of them, Deborah took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Frank, our last meeting left me with many questions. I can't shake the feeling that there's a reason we met. Your birthmark. It's very special to me," Deborah began, her voice laced with emotion. Frank's expression turned curious, a hint of concern flickering in his eyes. "Deborah, you mentioned someone close to you had a similar mark. Is there more to this story?" Deborah nodded, the weight of years of silence pressing on her. "Years ago, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I had a son, but circumstances forced me to give him up for adoption. He had a birthmark, just like yours, on his wrist." Frank's cup paused halfway to his lips, the impact of her words hitting him. "You had a son? And he has a birthmark like mine? That's incredible." Deborah continued, her voice trembling with the effort to remain composed. "Yes, and every day since then, I've wondered about him, hoped he's happy and loved. When I saw your birthmark, it felt like a sign." Frank leaned forward, his demeanor serious. "Deborah, I don't know what to say. I'm just a guy who works in the park. I don't know how I could be connected to your story." Deborah reached across the table, her hand hesitating before touching his. "Frank, I don't expect you to have the answers. But talking to you, seeing that mark, it's brought up so much for me. I had to share this with someone who might understand." Frank covered her hand with his, a gesture of comfort. "Deborah, I'm honored that you shared this with me. And if there's any way I can help, I will." The conversation that followed delved deeper into their lives, with Deborah sharing more about her son Tyler and the life she had before meeting Patrick. Frank listened intently, offering words of support and understanding. As they parted ways that day, Deborah felt a sense of relief, a burden lifted by sharing her secret with Frank. Though the path ahead was uncertain, the connection between them had grown stronger, a bond formed by shared stories and the mysterious threads of fate that had drawn them together. Unbeknownst to Deborah, her revelation to Frank would set in motion a series of events that would bring her face to face with her past, challenging her to confront her deepest fears and desires. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time in years Deborah felt a flicker of hope, a chance to heal the wounds of her heart and possibly reunite with the piece of her soul she had left behind. In the heart of winter, as the city lay blanketed under a serene layer of snow, Deborah's life was on the cusp of a profound change. The connection she had found with Frank had grown, built on a foundation of shared confidences and the haunting possibility that their lives were intertwined by more than mere coincidence. Deborah and Frank had agreed to meet once more at the same cozy cafe, a place that had become a sanctuary for their unfolding story. As Deborah waited, her mind raced with the implications of what she was about to propose. Frank arrived, his face etched with lines of concern and curiosity. "Deborah, you seemed urgent on the phone. Is everything okay?" Deborah took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "Frank, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last meeting. I can't shake the feeling that there's something more to our connection. I want to find my son, Tyler, and I was hoping you'd help me." Frank's eyes widened, taken aback by the intensity of her request. "Deborah, I'm not sure how I can be of help. I mean, I want to help you, but I don't know where we'd even start. Deborah leaned forward, her gaze locked with his. I've done some research. There are private investigators who specialize in these matters. With your birthmark, the connection. I thought maybe, just maybe, you could be a lead, or even related to him somehow. Frank ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the situation settling on him. This is a lot to take in. But if you think it could help, I'm willing to try. I can't imagine what you've been through, Deborah. Encouraged by his willingness, Deborah outlined her plan. They would hire a private investigator to trace Tyler's adoption records, using Frank's birthmark as a starting point for the search. It was a long shot, but Deborah clung to the hope that it might lead them to Tyler. As they set their plan into motion, the wheels of fate began to turn, bringing unforeseen challenges to their doorstep. Patrick, who had been supportive of Deborah's quest to find fulfillment in their lives, stumbled upon the details of their plan one evening. Deborah, can we talk? Patrick's voice was calm, but underlined with tension. Deborah turned to find him holding a receipt for the private investigator. Patrick, I can explain. Patrick sat down, his demeanor a mix of hurt and confusion. I thought we were in this together. Why go to such lengths, involve someone else, without even talking to me about it? Deborah reached for his hand, her heart heavy with the burden of her secret desires. Patrick, this isn't about us. It's about me finding a piece of my past, something I've lost. Frank, he just happened to be a part of it, unexpectedly. Patrick withdrew his hand, the gesture widening the gap between them. But to go behind my back, Deborah? To hire a private investigator? It feels like you're searching for something I can't give you. Deborah's eyes filled with tears, the pain of her choices cutting deep. It's not that, Patrick. I love you. But there's a part of me that's incomplete. I thought you of all people would understand. The conversation that night ended with unresolved tensions, Patrick retreating into his thoughts, leaving Deborah to ponder the cost of her quest. The plan that had seemed like a beacon of hope now cast a shadow over her marriage, the pursuit of her past threatening the very foundation of her present. In the days that followed, the private investigator's search hit a dead end, the records sealed and impenetrable, leaving Deborah's questions unanswered. The strain on her relationship with Patrick grew, a silent testament to the risks of unearthing buried truths. Deborah and Frank met once more, this time in the shadow of their failed plan. I'm sorry, Deborah, Frank offered, his voice laced with regret. I wish we could have found him for you. Deborah shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. It's not your fault, Frank. We tried. And maybe that's all we can do. As they parted ways, Deborah knew that her journey had taken a toll on the relationships she valued most. The plan to find Tyler, though foiled, had unveiled the complex layers of her heart's desires, leaving her to confront the reality of her choices and the unpredictable nature of seeking closure. In the quiet aftermath, Deborah was left to reflect on the cost of her search for Tyler, the son she had never known, and the impact of her actions on the life she had built with Patrick. The path forward was uncertain, but the fallout from Deborah's quest to find Tyler had left deep fissures in her relationship with Patrick. The once warm and loving atmosphere of their home had turned cold, filled with unspoken words and unresolved tensions. Deborah, grappling with the weight of her decisions, knew a confrontation was inevitable. One evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, the silence between them was deafening. Deborah finally broke the stillness, her voice barely above a whisper. Patrick, we need to talk about what's happened. Patrick set his fork down, his expression a mix of resignation and sorrow. Yes, we do. Deborah, when we married, I promised to support you in everything. But this search for your son, it's taken a toll on us. I feel like I've lost you to a ghost. Deborah's eyes filled with tears, the pain of her husband's words cutting deep. Patrick, I never meant to hurt you. I thought finding Tyler would heal a part of me, but I see now the cost was too high. Patrick reached across the table, taking her hand in a gesture of comfort. I understand the pain you've been carrying, Deborah, but we've lost our way in this. It's like there's no room for me in your heart anymore. Deborah squeezed his hand, her heart aching. You're wrong, Patrick. There's always been room for you. My search for Tyler, it wasn't about replacing what we have. It was about finding closure. Patrick withdrew his hand, the distance between them growing. Maybe so, Deborah, but in seeking that closure, you've opened old wounds that I'm not sure can heal. The conversation lingered into the night, both searching for a way to bridge the gap that had formed between them. But as the night wore on, it became clear that their paths were diverging, the shared dreams and promises they once made now overshadowed by the pain of recent events. In the days that followed, Patrick and Deborah met with a quiet resolve, the decision to part ways hanging heavy in the air. Their final conversation was filled with the kind of honesty and raw emotion that had been missing in the months prior. Deborah, I will always care for you, but I think it's best if we go our separate ways, Patrick said, his voice steady but filled with regret. Deborah nodded, her own heart breaking. I never wanted it to come to this, Patrick. I'm so sorry for the pain I've caused. Patrick stood, his silhouette framed against the setting sun. I hope you find what you're looking for, Deborah. I truly do. And with that, Patrick walked away, leaving Deborah amidst the ruins of their life together. The loss of her marriage, a consequence of her unresolved past, and the search for a son she had never known, weighed heavily on her soul. In the aftermath, Deborah found herself alone, the silence of the empty house a stark reminder of the cost of her actions. She had lost Patrick, the man who had stood by her through the darkest of times, in her pursuit of a ghost from her past. As she packed her belongings, each item a reminder of the life they had shared, Deborah realized the true magnitude of her loss. The search for Tyler had not only failed to bring her closure, but had also cost her the love and support of the one person who had truly been there for her. Leaving the house for the last time, Deborah stepped into an uncertain future, her heart heavy with regret and the painful understanding that some wounds might never heal. The journey to find Tyler had ended, but the path to finding herself and rebuilding her life was just beginning. Deborah stood at the threshold of her childhood home, the modest house in the village where she had grown up. The air was filled with the familiar scent of blooming flowers and fresh earth, a stark contrast to the sterile elegance of the life she had just left behind. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The door opened to reveal her mother, Mary, whose face lit up with surprise and joy. Deborah, what a surprise. Come in, come in. As Deborah stepped inside, the familiarity of the home enveloped her, each room filled with memories of a simpler time. She followed her mother into the kitchen, where a pot of tea was quickly set to boil. Mum, Deborah began, struggling to find the words. Mary reached across the table, taking her daughter's hands in hers. I can see you're troubled, Deborah. What's happened? You can tell me anything, you know that. Deborah's resolve crumbled, and she poured out everything: the search for Tyler, the strain it put on her marriage with Patrick, and the eventual loss of both. Mary listened quietly, her eyes reflecting the pain and love she felt for her daughter. Oh, Deborah, I'm so sorry, Mary said, squeezing her hands. But you're home now. We'll get through this together. Deborah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I don't know where to go from here, Mum. I feel like I've lost everything. Mary stood, moving to sit beside her daughter, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. You haven't lost everything, my dear. You have family, you have a home, and most importantly, you have a chance to start anew. It won't be easy, but you're not alone. In the days that followed, Deborah found solace in the rhythms of village life, helping her mother with the garden, walking along the paths she had once known so well. The simplicity of these actions, so far removed from her life with Patrick, began to mend the fractures in her spirit. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, Mary broached the subject Deborah had been avoiding. "Deborah, have you thought about trying to find Tyler again? Not to reopen old wounds, but perhaps there's a part of you that still needs closure." Deborah sighed, the thought having crossed her mind more than once. "I have, Mom, but after everything that's happened, I'm scared. What if it only leads to more pain?" Mary took her daughter's hand, her voice firm yet gentle. "Pain is a part of life, but so is healing. You might not find what you're looking for, but the journey could help you find peace. And remember, I'll be here with you, every step of the way." Encouraged by her mother's words, Deborah made a decision. She would try again to find Tyler, but this time with a different perspective. Not as a quest to fill a void or escape her present, but as a step toward healing and understanding her past. As the seasons changed, Deborah took small, cautious steps to reconnect with the parts of herself she had lost. She began volunteering at the local community center, finding joy in helping others and slowly rebuilding her sense of purpose. And one day, sitting at her old desk, looking out at the garden that had witnessed her tears and now her resolve, Deborah penned a letter to Tyler. It was not a plea or an expectation, but an offering of her story, her apologies, and her love. Whether Tyler would ever read it or whether they would meet was uncertain. But for Deborah, the act of writing the letter was a step toward forgiveness of herself and the choices she had made. The return was not just to her childhood home but to her own heart, a journey of facing her losses and finding a way to live with them, surrounded by the love of her family and the hope for a future, however different it might look from the one she had once envisioned. Months had passed since Deborah decided to make her peace with the past and embrace the uncertain journey ahead. The village, with its timeless rhythm and close-knit community, had offered her a sanctuary to heal and reflect. One crisp autumn evening, as Deborah and her mother sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Deborah shared her thoughts, the reflections of her heart. "Mom, these past months have been..." Enlightening Deborah began, her voice tinged with a newfound serenity. "I've learned so much about myself, about loss, and about the strength it takes to move forward." Mary, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the setting sun, nodded. "I've seen the change in you, Deborah. It's been a difficult journey, but you've faced it with courage. I'm proud of you." Deborah smiled, a genuine expression of gratitude. "Thank you, Mum, for everything. You were right, I wasn't alone. I had you in this place to come back to. It's given me a sense of peace I didn't think was possible." The conversation drifted to the future, to the possibilities that lay ahead. Deborah shared her plans to continue working at the community center, to contribute to the village that had given her so much. "And what about Tyler?" Mary asked gently, a question that still lingered between them. Deborah sighed, a mixture of hope and resignation in her voice. "I haven't found him, Mum, but I've made peace with that. The letter I wrote, it was more for me than for him. It helped me let go of the guilt and the what-ifs, whether we meet or not. I hope he knows he's loved." Mary reached out, taking her daughter's hand. "He knows, Deborah. In his heart he knows." As they sat in silence, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear, Deborah felt a sense of completeness. The journey of the past year had stripped her bare, revealing the depths of her pain and the resilience of her spirit. She had lost so much: her marriage, the chance to know her son, the life she had built. But in those losses she had found something invaluable: her own strength, the love of her family, and the courage to face each day with hope. The epilogue of Deborah's story wasn't written in the pages of a reunion or in the fulfillment of all her dreams. Instead, it was found in the quiet moments of reflection, in the acceptance of life's imperfections, and in the realization that healing is a journey, not a destination. As the night settled around them, Deborah and her mother remained on the porch, a silent bond between them. The future was still unwritten, filled with uncertainty and promise. But for the first time in a long time, Deborah looked toward it not with fear, but with a quiet optimism. Her reflection on the journey taught her that life, in all its complexity, was still a beautiful mystery, one that she was now ready to embrace, whatever it may bring.